Hey guys, welcome back. So now getting back into X-Men, and I gotta say, shout out to Jay Kino from the comments section on the New Mutants video, because he had asked me if I was caught up with X-Men, and I was caught up with issue 8, but I had not read issue 9 before doing that video. So in this one, we're pretty much just gonna pick up where that left off, with X-Men being the continuation of the New Mutants cliffhanger, and I almost said hangover. But if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top, so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. And you know, hang over in the comments and just talk about stuff. Alright, so jumping right back in, and at this point in Krakoa, where we have the mysterious egg which was brought back by the New Mutants, and more specifically Mondo and Cypher. And y'all already know how Mondo likes to carry stuff, because he be keeping all kind of carry-on luggage in his stomach. But coming back here to Krakoa, when we actually discover what this egg is, it actually ties a lot closer to Powers of 10 than what I expected. And this is something we start to see when we go back out to Shi'ar space, to where on the fringe of Shi'ar space we see the fault, which was made at the conclusion of the War of Kings, and it looks like we're getting a lot of connections to that conclusion, to where at the time it ended with this boss match between Black Bolt and Vulcan, with Black Bolt wanting to detonate the Terrigen bomb closer to Shi'ar space than Vulcan was comfortable with, which of course caused the two of them to be at odds. But a few things to point out here which are coming back, and then I'm gonna get to the Powers of 10 thing. But a few things that are coming back that we should keep in mind throughout the course of this, which are: 1, Vulcan's ability to manipulate energy also include energy absorption and his crazy healing factor, which I feel like kinda also fall into the energy absorption thing. Because back towards the conclusion of War of Kings, Black Bolt screamed the skin off this man's body, which at the time was just a reminder of some of the things that Vulcan can survive, much like what we'd seen in Deadly Genesis. And with their fight overloading the Terrigen bomb, which exploded, and this explosion created a rift between space and time, which is located in between Shi'ar and Kree space, which is where Medusa also wanted it to detonate had the detonation been executed properly in order to minimize casualties of anyone nearby. And so fast forward to now, I'm pretty sure this is the same rift that we're looking at, which is an opening between space and time, to where now we see a number of sky whales, to whom many of which have been infected by the Brood. And this is the part that I wanted to tie back into Powers of 10, and after that we'll be right back, I promise. But what I wanted to point out is that in Moira's previous life, 1,000 years into the future, where mutant refugees were separated throughout Shi'ar space, the Benevolence portion was located on the fringe of Shi'ar space as a buffer between the spawning grounds of the Brood, which is the same location of the conclusion of War of Kings, your mutant refugees from Powers of 10, to where even in that future it's referred to as the spawning ground of the Brood, which in my mind has me thinking like it would be insane if the Terrigen bomb, which created this rift between time and space, created a doorway which originally allowed the Brood into this universe, which I know would be insane, but with just playing with the idea of the theory of time and space, potentially this fringe or this doorway could lead to alternate timelines or even alternate futures, which could lead back to Powers of 10 or anywhere. But I digress. Not finna open that can. I'm gonna crack it open just a little bit, but I ain't finna fully open it. But all in all, back to current day, this location is significant to the Brood, not just because of their spawning ground, but also in correlation with history to the King Egg, which as we know has recently made its way to Krakoa. But as for a little history on the King Egg, which is actually a weapon that was designed by the Kree in order to weaponize the Brood, which is something that we talked about the Kree doing a number of times, whether it's in our talks about Venom First Host, where they try to use symbiotes as like a form of armor, or more recently in our talks of giant-sized X-Men, when the Kree attempted to weaponize the Sidri, which was an attempt that failed because the Sidri, they don't have a hive mind, but instead rather a collective consciousness. Which by the way, I gotta say, like, it is crazy that they are back too. But in the case of the Kree who had experimented with the Brood over the course of hundreds of years, because they had discovered that the Brood operated in a hive mind system, to where amongst trillions you have thousands of queens. But after discovering this within their secret science wing, the Kree then sampled Brood pheromones to create a weapon that would usurp the queen's authority, gaining control over the Brood, whose numbers exceed over 6 trillion, which is just a ridiculous number. But fast forward to now when Idye and Broo make their way here to the Academos habitat, which is like the New Mutants neighborhood here in Krakoa. But while Broo is here, he points out the egg and he's like, why do you guys have that? Because once again, they have no clue to like what exactly is sitting here, or even furthermore, the reasoning to why this thing was so heavily guarded and isolated where they got it from. But it's here that they learn from Broo, 1, it's a bad idea to have it here, and Broo knows this because he immediately recognizes that it's the King Egg. But while this is happening, we jump over to the Summers house on the moon, to where we go over to Vulcan, who's having this dream that he's drifting in the fault, which was created at the conclusion of War of Kings. But within this dream, he's drifting in the fault, and it always ends with him waking up. And this is something that sparks a lot of curiosity, because it really raises the question of how exactly did Vulcan come back, or if Vulcan had actually ever died. Because we've seen this guy survive a number of catastrophes time and time again. And though we don't get this answer immediately, that is one of the things that I am eager to know. Because either he survived the War of Kings and pulled himself back together, or if this is another version of Vulcan who was created in Krakoa and his memory stopped from whenever Cerebro lost connection with the original Vulcan. And if that's the case and there's another Gabriel out there, I would lose my Vulcan mind. But when he wakes up in the Summers house and he tells his brothers Havoc and Cyclops about this dream, they wake up just to see sky whales flying over the moon and making their way to Earth. And this takes us back to Krakoa, where Broo is given the full explanation of what the King Egg is and how it can cause brood queens to go to war, and if special precautions aren't taken, a brood hive can smell this King Egg from a galaxy away, which at this point for them is a little bit late to do anything about, because the brood have arrived in Krakoa, and though it's only a fraction of what we've seen floating around the fault, it is still a significant number. And keep in mind, though some might think like a mutant island like Krakoa would have plenty of people to fight off the brood, but that's not necessarily the case, because one, every mutant doesn't have necessarily a combative power set, which is why a number of them make their way out of there and make their way to the arena as Cyclops and others from the Summers home arrive. But also too, all your heavy hitters aren't always in Krakoa all the time. But it's also here where Scott and Jean arrive, and immediately where they're stepping into all this chaos, Broo finds Jean and he lets her know that he knows why the brood are here, which is because the King Egg, and they've got to get it out of there. But from there, Jean immediately sends the message to Cyclops, who as commander leads this fight here to Magic, who's one of the great captains, so that he can get Broo to the Summer house on a ship and away from Krakoa. And with the King Egg no longer there, eventually it'll lead the brood away. But also keep in mind with this that with the sky whales, the brood can cover a lot of distance in a short amount of time, so they are punching it from here. But when we jump over to Shi'ar space, we see the Accuser, who had actually hired the Starjammers in the first place to steal the King Egg and return to the Kree. And for obvious reasons, he's not happy because the Starjammers don't have it, and the only reason he's kept them alive at this point is because he needs to know where it is. But right after this, we see this Accuser having a conversation with Sunspot, and it's likely he was reaching out to Super Guardian, and Bobby just answered the call. And this takes place before what we saw in New Mutants, where Bobby bought the building, because here he's just visiting Sam and Izzy's place. But as it turns out, he ends up making an agreement with the Accuser, telling him that he'll have the King Egg delivered in exchange for letting the Starjammers go. And I do gotta say, for Bobby, this was a bit of a savory moment, especially with the New Mutants being double-crossed by the Starjammers, which also gave him an opportunity to be a total jerk. But rather than doing that, he did propose a deal. But also with doing this, while Bobby was staying at Sam's place, he told Izzy to inform Gladiator that the Accuser was there, which totally interrupted Gladiator going hunting with his son. And it's funny because his son is like, "Dad, your time is always getting interrupted. Like, we rarely get any me and you time, but I'll forgive you if you just mess this guy up for me." And out of sheer love for his son, Gladiator pulls a stage fatality, punching this dude clean out of the ship, only to get eaten by a sky whale. And it's really moments like these where you wish NetherRealm also made Marvel games. And if they did, I highly doubt they would have fatalities, but at least you would have your specials like Injustice. But with Cyclops and the others who are making their way out to Shi'ar space, and with doing so, the brood are on them, and it's come to the point where they cannot outrun the brood anymore. So with knowing this, Cyclops makes the call that they take them to a nearby planet, but next to the planet there's this unmarked space station, which was the same station of the Accuser, to where Havoc tried to send them a signal telling them to evacuate immediately, but at this point there was no time for them to get out. And as a result, the brood destroyed the station, leaving everyone crash landing on this planet. But also at this point, with them being in Shi'ar space, like we had talked about, they are super close to your spawning territory of the brood, who once again can smell the King Egg a galaxy away, which causes them to swarm here like crazy. But here's where we also learn why the brood want to destroy this egg, because as we know, it was designed to control them, but with the way that the hives are set up, with thousands of queens overseeing trillions of brood, it is actually the queens who send their brood to destroy this egg, because it essentially can take all of their authority away from them. And because the queens do not want to lose that power, they will kill anything that gets in their way, or more specifically send the hive to destroy anything that gets in their way. But with knowing that in the middle of this chaos, like ironically, everything just stops. and the brood start to fall back, which is a huge relief because honestly, these dudes were just prolonging their death sentence here. But when we come to find out why all of this is stopped, it's because Brew ate the egg, which is actually what it was designed for, because when the Kree designed the king egg, which was constructed of modified brood pheromones, the solution within it then altered Brew to usurp the queens and become their king, which was a pretty genius weapon, with him now being able to control the thousands, which controls trillions, which in itself is just insane. But I also like that Brew got this upgrade because in a weird way it just kind of felt like it was meant to be. And we may even see this connect to Blake, who was the Brood pilot we'd seen from Weapon H, who hopefully hasn't blown through his 20 million that he made from Dario Agger after getting a double cut, but we'll see. But what this changes in comparison to what we've seen with Powers of 10, like instead of Benevolence serving as a buffer between the Brood and Shi'ar space, they now had the Brood as like this insane ally or even friend of an ally because of Brew and his relationship to the mutants in Krakoa. But on top of that, just kind of getting back into where this sews into what we've seen with New Mutants, this is also what paves the way to Cyclops asking for that favor from Gladiator to get a Krakoan door located on Chandelure, which I gotta say once again, I feel like it's a favor that he was just waiting to ask. But real quick before we go, I want to give a shout out to all the Patreons. Thank you guys for all of your support, and for anyone who's new here and you want more information on how to support the channel, just head over to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.